Welcome back to the IBFP. Here's your host, Boxing New.
Welcome back, fight fans. Welcome back. Let's just dig right into it. Who is the next one to be exposed? Errol Spence, Gervonta Davis, or Jermall Charlo? Let's just break it down honestly and objectively as possible. And, all three of these guys are enormously hype fighters. All three of these guys, have some talent, have some skills. None of these guys are terrible fighters. All are quality in their own way. But these guys are hyped up to being the best in their respective divisions. But their skill set simply doesn't coincide with how good they truly are. So which one of these guys will be the next to be exposed? And we start with Errol Spence Jr. When you take a look at Errol Spence Jr., you see he's a unified, undefeated world champion. So there's a lot of respect that goes out to Errol Spence for that. But his biggest wins are against Garcia, a guy moving up 2 weight classes, and he still was unable to stop him. Kell Brook winning the world title off of a guy who has already been stabbed in the leg, a guy who was coming off a knockout loss, who was weight drained, and who was also coming off a broken eye surgery. So when you look at all of that, you see Kell Brook, Garcia, those are asterisk fights. And then you look at a guy like Shawn Porter. He literally went life and death with Shawn Porter. It was a split decision, and he really won it by a razor-thin margin. People like myself believe that Shawn Porter deserved the victory, but, Errol Spence Jr. got it. He's a unified champion, even if it is by the slightest and slimmest of margins. You see that type of skill is not at the level of a guy like Terrence Crawford. So you see why that Errol Spence Jr. was in a rush to call out Keith Thurman. He was in a rush to call out Danny Garcia and Shawn Porter, but he's in zero rush to call out Terrence Bud Crawford. And, he stated that, and I'm going to use his words because he doesn't want the Terrence Crawford fight. And he stated that, he'll fight Terrence Crawford after he already wins 3 titles. Those were his words, not mine, his words. His words as well is he stated that some fighters are just on the wrong side of the street. And also, the last but not least, you see Errol Spence Jr. was lining up a fight with Danny Garcia before he even got hurt. So before he was even hurt in a car accident, he was already lining up a fight with the guy like Danny Garcia. He wasn't looking for a unification with Terrence Crawford. He was lining up a fight with Danny Garcia, a fight that would have done nothing for his brand. This is a guy, Danny Garcia, who has no elite level wins in welterweight division. He's lost to Porter and Thurman. This is a guy, Danny Garcia, who has no belt, and he's not a pound for pound fighter. What good would a Danny Garcia fight do compared to a Terrence Crawford? You got to be honest and unbiased. At the end of the day, Errol Spence Jr. will not be the next one to get exposed simply because he will not take that amount of risk by fighting a guy like Terrence Bud Crawford. But let's keep it going, and then we get to Jermall Charlo. You see Jermall Charlo. He's called out Canelo for a long time. He's basically stated that he wants that fight, and he ended up being offered the fight, and he literally turned the fight down. This is a guy who turned the fight down, and at the end of the day, it was a very lucrative multi-million-dollar offer, and this is a guy who's doing 275,000 views on Showtime. This is a guy who barely just headlined his first card in 2019. This is a guy who was exposed by Matt Korobov. This is a guy who has a limited skill set and who's known as a headhunter. This is a guy who should be looking for the biggest and best opportunity since he's at his physical prime, but he's fighting guys like Dennis Hogan, moving up a weight class, coming off a loss. That's his best fights coming up. He just fought another guy coming off a loss in Brandon Adams. His back-to-back fights were Brandon Adams moving up in weight and then Dennis Hogan moving up in weight coming off a loss. That's garbage truck juice. So you got to be honest and unbiased about who Jermall Tune-Up Charlo is. At the end of the day, Eddie Hearn's even made him another offer to make a unification with him and Demetrius Andre, and he's played out, blatantly ignored and bypassed that offer as well. He will not be the next guy to get exposed simply because he will not take any risky or dangerous fights. When you look at his pattern, fighting guys like Dennis Hogan and Brandon Adams and turning down Canelo and Andrade, what fight do you think he'll take? He simply won't take the risk. But let's keep it going. And then you get to Gervonta Tank Davis, Gervonta Stank Davis, Gervonta Cheeseburger Davis. And we got to be honest and unbiased about the guy. Gervonta Davis has shown flashes of brilliance early in his career. But since he has regressed instead of progressed, And you know what I mean by that is, the guy's been struggling with weight discipline issues. He's missed a weigh-in and lost a belt. He's and most recently he moved up in weight and missed weight on the first attempt, and they had to give him 2 hours to try to make weight. You got to understand that Gervonta Tank Davis is in the news for domestic violence charges. At the end of the day, when you look at a guy like Gervonta Tank Davis, it seems like wasted potential. And Gervonta Tank Davis, he does have some potential, and he is a credible and respectable fighter. He's simply not elite. He's simply not the best, and he's basically a clout chaser. When you look at Gervonta Tank Davis, he's called out Vasyl Lomachenko. He's called out Tevin Farmer. He's called out, Josh Taylor. He's called out Manny Pacquiao, and yet has fought none of these fighters. His most recent fight was against a Yuriorkis Gamboa, a 40-year-old fighter who's already been dropped 14 times, who's been recently knocked out, and a guy who tore his Achilles in the second round, and yet Tank still went the full distance with him. At the end of the day, Tank Davis will be the next fighter to get exposed, and this is why I believe it's going to happen, is that you see that on the Chris Mannix podcast, Golden Boy has reached out to the PBC about making that fight in December 2020. The PBC seems to be receptive to that offer, and you see Gervonta Tank Davis even throwing slurs and harsh words at Ryan Garcia over Twitter, because he's literally chomping at the bits for this particular fight. He thinks it's sweet, he thinks it's easy, not realizing that Ryan Garcia has a height and reach advantage over him, not realizing that Ryan Garcia has basically on the verge of elite level hand speed, not realizing that Ryan Garcia is being trained by Eddie Reynoso, Canelo Alvarez's trainer, not realizing that Ryan Garcia is getting the best sparring in the business with a Canelo Alvarez, not realizing is that Ryan Garcia is one of the stars on the rise, and based on his skill set, his physical attributes, his training, and his sparring, he looks like he's going to be a major problem, and he could be the guy to take down Gervonta Tank Davis should he do and show his worth against a guy like Jorge Linares. There's a lot to be determined, but it looks like at this point Gervonta Tank Davis will be the next fighter to get exposed. But once again, Unbiased as always, it's the IBFP.